Okay, now that we've zoomed out to get an overview, to survey the territory, to look at what each of the chapters in Lahiri's The Namesake is doing, giving them chapter labels. These are all zoom out strategies. Now it's time to zoom in. So these are strategies for dealing with long books, for strategically reading and dealing with length. So one of the questions is we've got, chapters 7 through 12, or 1 through 12 if you think about it. And I want to zoom in with selective reading to find quotations that are useful to me, to find quotations to spend the time with, to really analyze, break down, and employ as part of a larger essay's argument. So one of the things that helps us, in previous, we just looked for hot spots. Anything that struck out as strong, we could throw into our lit journals and start there. But now we're being more tactical. Our time is limited. Our energy and focus is limited. So we want to use what we have well. Okay, how do I filter out? How do I choose which chapter to read? How do I filter out which paragraphs to look at? Well, one of the things we can do is use those questions, those real world questions that we've talked about this week in our discussion board. Right? Reading is a great thing. Reading can save people time and energy and heartache. That's part of why we do it. Sure, it can be pleasant on a sunny day at the beach, but we also read for insight. And I can't emphasize that enough. I mean, why do we go through such work? Why do we spend whole college classes, college careers, ask you guys to come in and play around with these complex and difficult literary texts? Well, there's a payoff when we can live a real life in real time, but if we can get strategies, information, awareness, insight from reading, we can save days and days and days, hours and hours of lived experience and trouble. So there are real questions. There are hard, complex questions in life. Should I break up with him? Is it time to move in? Is this for real? Am I being duped or am I really in love? How important is blah, blah, blah. A whole list of questions that we've listed. I listed a bunch. I've asked you to come up with more, and I want you to be honest. I don't know what your questions are. I can imagine, but what are some of the questions that have come up with crisis, difficulties, challenges that you faced? There could be resources. These are the questions that we need to deal with right now, or these are the questions that responsible adults take on and don't shy from and don't walk away from. So, okay, one of the questions that came up in my reading that I think is useful apropos to the namesake is can I date someone from a different race? What's up with intermixed culture relationships? Are they okay? I want to say yes. Why not? Most of my students say yes, but when I ask them, would your parents be okay with that? Would your grandparents be okay with that? Everything gets a little bit more dubious. Are interracial or cross-cultural relationships okay? Sure, but what are their difficulties? So that's a real question. It's certainly a question in my life. I'm a Christian married to a Jew. We're both white. We share race, but we certainly don't share academic backgrounds, and we certainly don't share Christmas holidays, or I should say winter holidays. So it's a real question. So you can use these real world questions as a filter. And so then I come back, what are the difficulties of interracial marriage? Well, namesake certainly shows up in the namesake. How culture affects relationships shows up a little bit in Do You Know Where I Am as well. They're two Native Americans. But okay, in the namesake it shows up. Where? Well, brown-skinned Gogol dates rich white blonde Maxine. There's one. Doesn't work, breaks up. Later in the book, before Gogol and Mushumi get together, Mushumi was in a very substantial relationship. Brown Bengali Mushumi was in a long relationship with this white guy named Graham. It was serious. Families had met. They were engaged. They were weeks away from the wedding. And then there was a blow up. And the blow up that ended their relationship was about culture. wasn't about money. It wasn't about cheating. It was about culture. So I can look there as well. And voila, jump chapter 8. The Mushinbi chapter here is the long, single, page long, difficult paragraph where Mushinbi and Graham break up. What's up with these long paragraphs? They are long. They are detailed. They are descriptive. And that's on purpose. That's intentional. That's Lahiri's choice. Because these long, descriptive, novelistic paragraphs are part of a technique used by literary realism. Literary realism was a mode, a tradition of novel writing where writers try to represent the real world as it is in all of its density and all of its description. When you're reading a realistic novel, you can settle in and slow down, and you can imagine the world that's being virtually represented for you. And this actually was quite a revolution in 19th century. The most famous literary realists were Russian novelists in the mid 19th century. Some of the names you recognize: Tolstoy and Dostoevsky and Nikolai Gogol. So boom, there's suddenly a huge bells are going off with a very strong, very extended literary allusion that Lahiri is making. She names her main character Gogol. She talks about Gogol's overcoat, the collected stories that saved Ashok's life in the train. She uses it as an epigram to the book. She quotes the overcoat on the first page, and he picks it up in the last chapter. So when Lahiri is making all these Gogol references with all these long, realistic descriptions, she is honoring that literary, realistic Russian novel tradition. She's stealing its techniques or appropriating them, but she's not a Russian white male novelist from the 19th century. She's a 20th century brown Bengali American woman. So sure, she's honoring this tradition, but she's turning it around to represent a world that has not been represented in literature. She's representing a whole new culture not in a whole new way, but a whole new a kind of description. She's doing something that's very much like something else, like Monet did in Gardenias. He reached in to that Western romantic tradition of gardens, of Le Roman de la Rose, and he turned that heteronormative tradition, honored it, celebrated it, and then claimed it and rewrote it as a gay man in a same-sex relationship of profound and life-changing love. So we can refer to traditions, and then we can change them, honoring them and changing them at the very same time. That's one of the cool, delightful things that I get to notice because of my rich and our rich reading throughout a long tradition, as opposed to just reading the new stuff. So how cool is that? You're really seeing this appropriation and transformation of literary traditions now in two different ways: the Western Romance tradition and the Russian realistic novel tradition. Okay, Gogol. And now I still have this long, dense paragraph to deal with. And I know it's going to help me talk about intercultural relationships. I know I can't use a whole page. I can't quote a whole page. So I'm going to go back in and read it slowly and thoughtfully and use this reading to sift through where is stuff that I can just kind of sift out because it's not essential, and where are the sentences that are really important for me to address this issue of cultural conflict in an intercultural relationship. So off I go. You can listen along and think as you're listening, is this really essential, or what are the key words that have to be included in my essay? A few weeks before the wedding, they were out to dinner with friends, getting happily drunk. And she heard Graham talking about their time in Calcutta. To her surprise, he was complaining about it, commenting that he found it taxing, the culture repressed. All they did was visit irrelevance, he said. Though the city was fascinating, the society, in his opinion, was somewhat provincial. People tended to stay home at most of the time. There was nothing to drink. Imagine dealing with 50 in-laws without alcohol. I couldn't even hold her hand on the street without attacking stares. She had listened to him, partly sympathetic, partly horrified. For it was one thing for her to reject her background, to be critical of her family's heritage. It was another thing completely to hear it from him. She realized that he had fooled everyone, including her. On their walk home from the restaurant, she brought it up, saying his comments had upset her. Why hadn't he told her these things? Was he only pretending to enjoy himself all the time? They began to argue, a chasm opening up between them, swallowing them, and suddenly, in a rage, she had removed his grandmother's ring from her finger and tossed it into the street, into the oncoming traffic. Graham had struck her on the face as pedestrians watched. By the end of the week, she'd moved out of the apartment and quit school. Pretty high drama. They're walking across the street. She overhears something. He's being critical. She's completely surprised. She shares her upset. They start to fight. Ring thrown, face across, slapped. And the relationship's over. This isn't just a little kerfuffle. This is a pretty dramatic, in fact, physically violent upset. Woo! Now, to use that, I want to use that. And so I can read through, and anything that's not essential, I'm going to line out and just mark with the ellipsis. So in the very beginning, a few weeks before the wedding, they were out to dinner with friends, getting happily drunk, and she heard Graham talking about their time in Calcutta. Well, I'm just going to start my citation with, she heard Graham talking about their time in Calcutta. To her surprise, he was complaining about it, commenting he found the culture repressed. That's important. All they did was visit her relatives, he said. Though the city was fascinating, the side was provincial. I can let that go out. People tend to stay home. There's nothing to drink. Imagine 50 in-laws. Then I'm going to come back again. I couldn't even hold her hand on the street without attracting stares. I need that. She had listened to him, partly sympathetic, partly horrified. For it was one thing for her to reject her background, another to hear it from him. She had fooled everyone. Blah, 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 blah. They began to argue. A chasm opened up. Right? So I can chunk out whole big chunks that are lovely in the read, but not essential to the inclusion in my paper. And every time I do that, I just put in those little 3 dots, 3 little ellipses. Now, you can see this all done out with great precision in the Literary Journal number 9 assignment in Blackboard. So I really commend you to look at that. Take the time to read through what I've done so you can really see an example in detail for yourself. It's much easier to see on paper than to hear from me. But that's the first step of squeezing down, of sifting through, of compressing a big long quote into a usable chunk that's going to put focus for you and for your reader on your argument. And so then the next thing I need to do is just use that quote and build myself an IITT paragraph. And that's what your Lit Journal assignment is this week, to just write one of those paragraphs, to move from our Lit Journal formula to as a formula that's useful for writing an essay. You remember IIET, introduce, include, explain, and tie in. So we've just worked on the quote. We've selected a quote using our essay question to find a chapter and focus in on what we're doing. And these ellipses show places in the quote where I've let words fall away to shorten the quote. Because it's more than 3 lines, I'm going to turn it into a block quotation. I'm going to finish the quote, open parentheses, put Lahiri's name and the page number, and I'm going to hang out there outside the period. Normally, we put the period at the end, but now not in a block quotation. We're going to bring it in by margins and throw the Lahiri thing. You can read more about block quotations at the Owl Purdue site if you're not already familiar with them, or ask somebody or ask me to check your work. So that's the including part. In our Lit journals, we usually write observations, And in essay writing, we do the same thing. We might call it explain the quote. And you guys remember, how do you explain a quote? Well, you look for those really key words. I can criticize, but you can't. A chasm grew between us. He threw the ring. She hit him across the face in front of other people, adding embarrassment as well as astonishment. So I can go look for those keywords, and I'm going to use those keywords in the quote, and I'm going to talk about them in 3 or 4 or 5 sentences to show that, wow, she was surprised when she heard the criticism. It was news to her. Why haven't you tell me these things? Wow, how important in cross-cultural relationships that we're honest with our reactions and assessments of cultural experience along the way. We don't keep secrets about our internal likes and preferences, that we share them so that we can then be honest and open and negotiate. Comes up with food all the time, right? Comfort food for me, Christian suburbanite from Rochester, New York, is really different than comfort food for my Jewish husband, whose grandfather ran a deli. You know, he loves tuna fish and egg salad. And he just doesn't get how wonderful my grandmother's soup is with the cabbage in it for him. So you know, we have to decide, how often are we going to eat egg salad and grandma's soup, in if our marriage, if our family culture is going to work together. And if we don't communicate this, we never get to negotiate openly. We're lying. We're slightly betraying each other and ourselves so it's complicated. It's work. Explain these keynotes. Then, okay, in our lit journals, we connect this to issues in the class or our lives. Well, here we do that in an essay, but we're tying it, connecting it more with more focus. We're tying it in to the essay's issue, in this case, cross-cultural difficulties. Cross-cultural relationships, the difficulties. What's love across cultures look like? So I want to make sure that phrase, the dimension, the focus of my essay shows up in one of the last sentences of this paragraph. Blah, 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 this shows drama, conflict, and void, so on and so forth. Cross-cultural relationships demand regular, constant, open, honest communication along the way. That's what this difficulty shows. A lack of communication along the way. It built up and it blows up, and the relationship can't survive. So the last thing I have to do, I have included it using ellipses to shorten the large quotation. I've explained it. This is thoughtful work by focusing on key terms and using them to help guide sentences, to help me really analyze and look at the important words, images, symbols, events. I've continued to write, tying these observations into the issue of the paper, tying in with even repeating the key term at the end of the paragraph. All I have left to do is I've got to introduce it. I need to add a sentence in chapter 8 of Jhumpa Lahiri's The Namesake, the Mushumi chapter. We learn of a cataclysmic, disastrous breakup between brown-skinned Bengali Mushumi and her white fiancé Graham. Simple as that, one sentence, but look at all I've done. I've named the piece, I've located chapter 8, I've characterized the two characters, and I've readied my essay reader for the quotation and the discussion that follows. And I don't just drop quotations like bombs into a paper. I lead my reader in. I include, I introduce, include, explain, and tie in. This is focused, thoughtful work. It takes critical thinking to select a quote. It takes more critical thinking to leave out some stuff and highlight other. It takes really strong critical thinking to examine these words and how they function and to explain them in our own words. It takes takes patience to tie this in, refocus it into the dimension of. So all of this work is critical thinking work, even for non-literary people. It's exercising the thought patterns that responsible adults need to deal with complex issues. And that's the payoff. You're not just writing papers, you're really exercising what are in fact quite sophisticated thinking skills. And this work pays off. It pays off because it gets easier. It pays off because you can apply it in other contexts. I mean, right? We have to every day in life. We have to. All this housework? What can I leave away and get away without doing? What's less important? What can I drop? And what do I have to attend to right now? What about the project that I manage? What about all your schoolwork? What are the essentials? What are the things you can ignore? And if you can't ignore them, how can you quickly move through them so that you can focus on what matters, what's important? We use this skill all the time. In our literary work, we're just using it in a very advanced, very verbal form, which is even more challenging, but it resonates in all kinds of other places. Sharpening your thinking can vastly improve the pleasure, the clarity, the importance, the meaning in our lives. That's why we do this. Again, this is hard, demanding work. And the greatest news is it's work that we're using about stuff that matters. We get in this class, we get to ask about real questions, real world questions that are complex, that are adult, that demand careful working through. And if we can get insight from conversation with each other, from honestly attacking stuff that really matters, if we can get insight from our reading, we are saving hours and hours and months of potential time and heartache. We get ourselves warmed. We get motivated to make, sometimes it's just clarity about things we kind of already sense, but that clarity about what's right, how we're going to function, how we need to grow and change, clarity about that is motivating and terrifically useful. So I want you guys to know how I appreciate all the heart. I appreciate the tenacity of you guys hanging in with all that's going on in people's lives, that you're hanging in with this semester, that you're showing up for these videos, putting up with me. I think is really a testament to your clear priorities, your ambition, your value of this work. And I just give you oodles and oodles of credit. Keep it up. You're doing it. The next 4 weeks are intense, but you guys aren't afraid of intensity. You know that there's payoff for this work far beyond your grade point average and your 3 credit hours. There's real consequential payoff in your lives for developing these strong critical thinking skills and to think about stuff that really matters. So I'm very proud of you. Hang in and keep it up. See you next time.